Bonjour, Wachaning. Welcome to Lakehead University's Global Indigenous Speaker Series. We are happy that you are able to join us today. Denise Baxter, Indigenous, Makwadodam, Martin Falls, and Donjaba. My name is Denise Baxter, Vice Provost, Indigenous Initiatives, and I will be your host for this event. Lakehead remains committed to social justice and social responsibility. Lakehead University will continue to advance the calls to the truth and reconciliation, calls for action, and the University's Canada Principles on Indigenous Education. We respectfully acknowledge that our campuses are located on the lands of Indigenous peoples. Lakehead Thunder Bay is located on the traditional lands of Fort William First Nation and Mkwaju, signatory to the Robinson's Treaty of 1850. Lakehead Aurelia is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe. The Anishinaabe include the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. Lakehead University acknowledges the history that many nations hold in the areas around our campuses and is committed to a relationship with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples based on the principles of mutual trust, respect, reciprocity, and collaboration in the spirit of reconciliation. Before we begin, I'd like to quickly run through some housekeeping items. Just an important notice of video recording of the Global Indigenous Speaker Series. Participants are reminded that this online event is being recorded, and we are doing this to preserve a record of the event in the university archives and to publicize and promote Lakehead University. By attending, you are agreeing to be included in the recording and its public dissemination in any media now known or later developed anywhere in the world in perpetuity. We will have a question and answer period where you have a chance to interact with our guests. And so I invite you to put your questions in the chat, and I'll call upon you and your question at the conclusion of her talk. It is now my pleasure to introduce Elder Jean Gizek from Kiaski Zaging Anishinaabe, who will share an opening prayer. Elder Jean, welcome.
Thank you. Chimigwech, Abojo, Wachi, Anin. Good morning. I say a short prayer so we get on with this lecture. Welcome there, Ashley. I'll ask the creator to guide us in four directions, and I'll do it in my language. Thank you. Akchamiwet, Shomis, Constage Nakasema, Inoamo, Ki Sakwa, Gi Nama, Wabanong, Shaunong, Nagabi Nong, Kiwet Nong, Umama the Kim, Chimigwet. Thank you, and have a good talk. Haha.
Me, great, Elder Jean. Always nice to see you, and thank you very much for your blessings for today. It is now my pleasure to welcome you to the second lecture in the Global Indigenous Speaker Series, Imagining a Just World Through Indigenous Knowledge Systems. Monumental events, including the National Inquiry into the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, No DAPL, Black Lives Matter, and deforestation and fires in the Brazilian rainforest have implicated settler colonial states and institutions in the violence and death of Indigenous and racialized people and the destruction of Indigenous lands. Indigenous knowledge systems, which are relational and anti-oppressive by design, can offer alternatives to the systems of domination which entangle our communities and support the reimagination of our global future. The speaker series highlights the theories, research, and practices of international Indigenous scholars and activists to inspire and challenge students, faculty, and community members to be agents of change in the pursuit of a world free from white supremacy, colonial violence, and racism. And today we are honored to have Ashley Cummings join us to deliver her lecture, Indigenous Resiliency and Strength. Ashley is a proud Inuk youth from Pangirtung, Nunavut, and currently lives in Whitehorse, Yukon. As an alumna of the Prime Minister's Youth Council, Ashley advised the Prime Minister on issues that have included, but are not limited to, rural and northern health and well-being, supporting ethical and Indigenous-led tourism, hunters' rights, and other issues affecting youth across Canada. She has also served as the co-chair of the Kids Help Phone Indigenous Advisory Circle on mental health care for Indigenous and rural communities, and this is a key focus in her advocacy. Her colorful background, including living in Nunavut, Yukon, Nova Scotia, Quebec, and New Brunswick, so really coast to coast to coast, has given her a comprehensive perspective on life for Indigenous young people. Ashley is currently working for the Training Policy Committee while studying for a Bachelor of Arts, Indigenous Governance at Yukon University. We look forward to Ashley's talk today as she discusses the incredible beauty and hardships in advocacy in today. Welcome, Ashley.
And thank you. Ulakud, everyone. I like keeping things pretty casual. So I look forward to your questions. Hope everyone feels comfortable and safe to ask me whatever comes to mind, because some harder things may come up, especially regarding mental health and some topics that may be triggering to some folks. So keep that in mind. And let me get my screen shared. Here. There we go. And so I always like to start as I talk about the backstory of me, because I think, especially as an Indigenous woman and as someone who has traveled around a lot, I think it's really important to understand the context of where people come from. And so for me, family has been integral to my life and my advocacy. As I do walk in both worlds as a mixed Inuk, so Inuk and settler heritage. And so this is my grampy, Percy, from my southern side of the family. And he was very essential in encouraging me and in supporting what I was doing, even when he didn't fully understand what I was doing. And I really always appreciated that. And go. But I grew up in Panaktu, Nunavut. This beautiful mountain range, the Asayuk Pass, was the view outside of my bedroom window. And so it was always very essential to me with mountains, and the land has always been important to me and my family, as you'll come to know through this presentation. So just to orient folks, that's I'm from right on the edge of the Arctic Circle. So living here in Whitehorse is both inland and pretty far from the Arctic Circle compared to other places I've lived, or compared to where I'm from, I should say. And the North is my home. That is consistently something I always say to friends, family, tourists, colleagues, whatever. The North is my home, and there's absolutely nowhere like the North. I feel it has been very integral in how it has shaped me, especially growing up around elders a lot. This is myself when I was young, and my Iluku, my great-grandmother, as well as my little cousin Iris. And so she always was very intentional about what stories she told me. And she always shared a lot of stories with me. And any afternoons I spent after school with her, or when I was just hanging around her home, there was always a lot of storytelling, whether it was scary stories or it was goofy stories, how elders like to poke fun. And my grandma is definitely one of those people, my iluku. And one thing I find comes up frequently in my work is people discussing the bleakness that they witness in the North. And so there's often negative views of the land, thinking there's just nothing there. And I've also been called a number of racial slurs, such as seal clubber is one I like to highlight, mostly because I was 12 years old when I faced that. So it is a very big part of my life, being a obviously Indigenous person, even though it's, even that comes into question with white passing Indigenous folks or anything like that, which we will get further into. But that really impacted my mental health for a long time. It was weighing on my head a lot for a while, but despite that, instead of bringing me down, I feel very thankful that it lit a different kind of fire in me to kind of discuss the hardships of mental health in the North, the access to healthcare, all of that stuff. And so it increased my mental health journey in finding myself and finding ways to support myself, whether it was through therapy, through art, through connecting with family and talking with friends, medication, whatever it might have been at the time. And that's why I feel it's really important to talk about mental health, and in a very frank way also. Even just last night when I shared the poster that Lakehead you made with friends and family, I got one message from a girl I had worked with during a mental health workshop in Nain, Nunatiavut. And she was telling me how thankful she was that she had a role model like me, and because she might be struggling with mental health stuff and all of that. So I feel it's really important to talk openly about the alternative ways that things may be going in life. So I feel really grateful that I've worked with Kids Help Phone for a number of years and continue to work with them. And I think it's really important to recognize that anti-love that exists in Indigenous communities. And so, of course, I have to use Bannock as the prime example of that, being a very proud Aya myself. And I feel like it's my auntie duty to make good Bannock for her and for my niece Malaya. And there's a way of finding hope across traditional territories, and sharing that anti-love is so important to me, even if non-Inuk kids end up finding me a little bit much, because I'm like, you are so incredibly cute, I could bite your cheeks. And so this is my beautiful sister and my beautiful niece Malaya, and we have found home across traditional territories. And so this past summer, we took a journey up to Eagle Plains and visited the Arctic Circle so that we could see a taste of our land, being so far away from it. And so we got to have the beautiful paungak, the crowberries that grow, the low bush cranberries, heather, all of these beautiful things that we loved so deeply while we were in our traditional territory. And so even though I've found, or I continue to find home wherever I go, my Atata and I, we did the Chilkoot Trail a couple of years ago, and it felt so incredible starting in a rainforest environment with humidity that my Inuk heart could barely stand, and going further and further into the mountains and finding those pieces of tundra and finding plants that I grew up picking alongside the rivers in my hometown, and being able to connect with the land in that integral way. And even so, I've been fortunate enough to work on cruise ships pretty enjoyably. And so working in Greenland, I got to visit a sakutak, which was or it continues to be a fish processing plant that many youth are still doing every summer, learning how to traditionally process fish, as this was traditionally a community that was forced to move into Sisimut. But despite that, I found home there too, which is such an important part of Indigenous resiliency, as we find different ways to experience our homes. And food is a big part of what is considered home for me. I feel like that's a big part of how my family connects, as many families do. And this is a beautiful piece of narwhal that my good friend Tagalik brought for me when I finally was able to make it back home to Nunavut a couple of years ago. And so we had a really lovely feast of this delicious food. But that also brings into question the food insecurity that that exists in the North and in rural communities, Of course, this is it's an older graphic, but it's still very relevant. It still continues to be an issue across the North. And I will say I'm a particular critic of the Nutrition North program. And I feel that an important way we need to support Indigenous folks and rural and northern folks is by subsidizing hunters' rights, such as, bullets, gas, because our traditional food is, is this. It's not the, frozen beef that might be in grocery stores. And food security continues to be a huge issue. And I feel I've faced quite a bit of judgment for my traditional food. And I feel sometimes I end up being treated as a bit of an artifact, not a person. And one funny example that I will bring up for this is I was working on a cruise ship in 2019, and we were discussing food of the North. And because I work for Hurtigruten, a Norwegian company, it's very international, and it's an incredible cultural exchange. And it also invites a lot of accidental ignorance, I like to call it, is you're just not exposed to the Indigenous ways of living in North America and how we discuss our identity. But one lovely human asked me while we were discussing traditional foods, especially Inuit diets are traditionally high protein, high fat, very little fiber, that kind of thing. And I got the question, so I'm a doctor and I'm wondering, with your traditional diet, are you constipated frequently? And I felt floored that this was a question that I was being asked while I was, mic'd up and discussing food insecurity in my home. And I feel that ends up being something a lot of Indigenous folks face, is the artifact, not a person. Sometimes I felt like a bit of a zoo animal, but being so proud of my culture and being so comfortable in discomfort, I feel grateful that I'm able to handle these questions, that I'm able to laugh it off and answer to the best of my abilities, which is no. And so it's a very important thing as we discuss identity, especially for Indigenous youth during a time where identity politics are so present. And keeping up with the food insecurity that's caused by a lot of high poverty in the North, lack of infrastructure, lack of supportive environments where people can sell their crafts if they're craftsmen, or share our culture in a really meaningful way on our traditional territory. And so it invites the discussion of the cruise ships that are coming more and more frequently to Nunavut communities in particular, now that climate change has impacted the Northwest Passage, making it really smoothly passable in the summer months. And I've been fortunate enough to go through the Northwest Passage in its entirety, as well as through partially. And ice hasn't been a huge issue when I've gone through the Northwest Passage. But one important thing to consider with these things is, with cruise ships, it brings increasing climate change concerns, because of course, these are massive pieces of engineering and are really impressive. And one thing I do feel thankful for, because it does bring revenue to the North, is that the cruise ships are becoming increasingly energy sustainable, such as the MS Roald Amundsen and the MS Nansen, part of Hurtigruten's fleet. They are they're hybrid. They work off electricity, so we can sail through the Northwest Passage completely in silence, which is absolutely stunning. And I hope more and more ships go down this route. And it brings the important revenue to all these communities, like I had mentioned. cruise companies pay various fees to their communities, as well as support if they have craft fairs going on, or if there are performances, things like that. It's a really beautiful and important thing to bring revenue to the north, to support a lot of artists, as tourists, of course, want to buy mementos from these stunning communities. And so I feel this fine balance between climate change and revenue generation, infrastructure building, etc., is a very difficult one to keep everyone happy, because even though I am a deep supporter of cruise companies, because I see the impact, the direct impact it makes, where a carver can sell one of his stunning pieces and he can feed his family for a month with that revenue. There's been a lot of important ways where you can witness these things firsthand, and supporting local is one of those big things. And also, of course, I'll mention how important beadwork is. I feel we're really in an Indigenous renaissance right now here in Canada, even though, of course, we have the hardships of finding the mass crime scenes in old residential school sites, and hopefully being one step closer to bringing these little souls home. But it's impressive that despite all the difficulties and hardships that Indigenous folks are facing as a whole, especially like in North America, in Canada, despite it, we're innovating. We continue to innovate, whether it is connecting to traditional crafts like this is Carmen Miller, and she is a caribou hair tufter here in Yukon, and honing these crafts, teaching more youth these crafts, as well as innovating, whether it's these acrylic, these stunning acrylic earrings. I unfortunately don't have the artist's name, but we are finding more and more ways to adorn ourselves in our traditional ways. And wow, like I am always so thrilled to see the various ways we continue to innovate, and we continue to work towards these things as we find more ways to share and live in our cultures. And so infrastructure is a really important thing in our self-determination. As we increase our infrastructure, whether it is making more community centers, such as in Joe Haven, there's a stunning community center that discusses the Franklin expedition in particular, given that it's the nearest community to where the Terror and the Erebus were found. And of course, this ethical adventure tourism is essential in continuing to increase our self-determination in Nunavut and across the north, and in all of our more rural communities as well, especially when it's up to us. That is the most important thing, especially living here in Yukon, where tourism pre-COVID was absolutely booming and was incredibly busy and stunning and a little bit stressful. And we are finding more ways to play on our land while caring for the people that live on this land. And so this is, of course, where I would like to plug Kagyavut, which is a society in Nunavut. And they are advocating for a performing arts center and somewhere where our stunning artists across Nunavut can gather and can teach our culture and hone our crafts. And it is really important in reclamation of our people. And so let's build a chavik. I think it's very important. And in the same breath, I think it's really important to that Inuit were repping our land. Indigenous folks across Turtle Island are repping our land. And so in particular, I like to highlight Talrotiop Imanga, which is a region of land that I'll show shortly. But this photo I'll put up for the hunters that may be in the room. There's a polar bear somewhere in this photo. I'll show you where it is shortly. And in these things, it's so important that law becomes a part of a lot of Indigenous folks' rhetoric. We are continuing to rep our land, and continuing to learn and advocate for our land, especially when they are incredibly biodiverse and incredibly important for our ecosystems. And so this is Talagotip Imanga, the two photos I showed you I took, and I took them roughly in that red circle. And it is a really neat and beautiful spot to visit. I'll plug cruises again, because once again, I encourage folks to go, especially with an ethical and good company. And so I've been fortunate to work in this area with the cruise, but also I was able to visit with Students on Ice. That's where I feel I really kind of opened up into my advocacy, to what really became my calling and something I'm really passionate about. And so there's the polar bear that was in the previous picture. So it's just right here. And Students on Ice works across the polar regions. Right now they're changing up their programming in a really interesting way to include youth all across Canada, especially again. But during my expedition, we were able to bring people from all across the world to my home region. We started in Greenland and ended in Resolute Bay, Nunavut. And I got to witness so much incredible beauty on the water, on the islands and the communities we visited. And I got to really learn meaningfully the wide breadth of expertise and knowledge that makes the North. And that is an incredibly stunning thing to witness on your traditional territory. And there were many other Inuit youth, other Indigenous youth, and of course, other settler youth that were in these circles. And we got to have such another incredible cultural exchange and discussed what's important to our culture, what's important to our self-determination, and how we continue to work together as Indigenous peoples as we continue to advocate for our communities. And this is where we connect with other youth. This is where we find other ways to hold other advocates up. This is one of my lovely friends, Megan Dicker, and she is an incredible Inuk youth who continues to advocate for her community and educating herself and just being an important role model that a lot of Inuit youth and Indigenous youth are looking up to. But this is where an interesting discussion on identity politics come in. It's like I mentioned, I'm a mixed Inuk settler and Inuk origin. And so I have been facing something new, which I still continue to reflect on, especially these past couple months. So I feel like where I speak here, it is still in process of figuring out what I really think about it. And so I've been recently called out as a mascot by an Inuit organization on Twitter because I worked with Bell, the phone company, highlighting my journey through mental health, as well as the importance of the work that I feel Kids Help Phone is doing for supporting Indigenous youth. And so it's been really interesting to reflect on these things in comment sections rather than discussing with me directly. I feel it's a little bit funny in that I can, disconnect myself and find the humor in the misunderstandings of people in the comment section. But it does bring back previous feelings I have of being a token in various roundtables and policy-making discussions I've been a part of. And, I've been called a token, specifically a token who just shows up, and we need to hold up, or we need to do more than just show up. And so I hope that all of you folks are thinking I'm doing more than just showing up in this talk. And I've spent my entire life defending my identity as an Inuk woman because I'm only half Inuk. which is such an interesting thing that so many Indigenous youth have to face, is when am I Indigenous enough? When am I still valid to discuss my people and my communities? And it is very discouraging for a lot of youth who aren't able to access these more political discussions where I find the advocates I'm fortunate enough to meet all agree that it doesn't matter the blood quantum that courses through your veins, it's your heart and your connection to your culture and your people and your community. And it's not being a mascot when you're showing up and you're discussing your identity. It is a very vulnerable and honestly quite a hard thing to do a lot of the time, but it's important work that if you have the energy to do it, then I encourage you to do it. But despite this, I continue to connect with elders in my work, and I don't let the difficult discussions of identity politics to really get under my skin quite as much as it did when I was younger. And so this is Mary Kudlak of Uluwatu, and she was so excited when I showed her my tattoos when I was working for her to group in and stop by their lovely community. And this is such an important revitalization of our identities as well. Across Turtle Island, so many Indigenous folks are reclaiming their traditional tattoos. Even just last summer, I got my facial tattoos, which I know that it is something that people are kind of on the fence about, because what about jobs that might not allow facial tattoos? And I almost didn't get them because I was concerned about that. But then I realized, honestly, screw a job that won't let me practice my culture. And I feel that's a lot of what's going on as we continue to grow as a society, is allowing for these different ways of self-expression in our identities, especially as Indigenous folks who have tattoos that are so incredibly meaningful. And even with Mary Kudlak, she got her traditional tattoos when she was in her 80s. But traditionally, these tattoos happened when women first got their moon time. And so having these different changes, and when she received her tattoos, she said, I look like my grandmother. And that is such a stunning and beautiful part of this revitalization, this Indigenous Renaissance, and showing our resiliency and strength of people as we reclaim these parts of us that were colonially taken and then labeled as devilish. Like even when I got my forearms tattooed, my mother told me, oh, you're going to hell. And of course she came around eventually and it was totally fine and I was gonna get them anyway. But we are changing a lot of deep-seated colonial ties as we reclaim our tattoos, we reclaim our various methods of self-expression. And other youth are really important regardless of their racial backgrounds, because as allies, we continue to hold each other up. And this is during my first meeting with the Prime Minister's Youth Council, and you can see my little mic lit up. And this was my first address to the Prime Minister, where I discussed supporting residential school survivors in their healing. My mother went to residential school, and I feel that is a very big part of what made connection difficult with her at times. And it's a really interesting thing, because even though, like, of course, I didn't go to residential school, and so many elders and so many people did, it's just, I feel like I'm losing my train of thought as I think about it, because there are so many facets to it to explore. And with residential school survivors, I know there's a lot of addictions that tend to take people away from their families. And that is consistently being a really big part of my advocacy in mental health work, because you know, I don't have a connection with my mother anymore, just because there's been too many hurts moving through. And so that's why my first address to the Prime Minister discussed that, and discussed the hardships and also the beauty that comes when people are able to overcome their addictions, whether that is through sobriety, whether that is through alternative interventions and counseling and healing. There are so many ways to look at healing through these ways. And it becomes lateral kindness as we continue to support each other through our individual journeys, not judging each other for it. And in these settings, I was able to meet other youth, Indigenous and settler, who were so stunningly supportive. And although I discuss a lot of the, I guess, like colonial advocacy, I guess that's more of my experience, or at least colonial in the sense of the setting. But it's so beautiful and important to mention the other ways of advocacy, whether it is through art or through talks like this, through whatever it may be. And so these two beautiful women with me are Asiva. She is a singer, and we grew up together, and she is a beautiful advocate for our culture, for language revitalization, especially as a lot of her singing happens in Inuktitut. And also Alyssa Xanka, right next to me, is she is a stunning Siberian Inuk who does a lot of performance art with her mother, Olga. And I know I'm not doing their work justice, because they are amazing throat singers and drummers and dancers who are incredibly vibrant. And we received our traditional markings around the same time, Asiva and I being able to sit together when we got our tattoos done, which felt like it feels like a sacred moment. It absolutely was a sacred moment, sitting together and singing and laughing and crying as we received something that was almost taken away from us entirely. So getting back to more of my experience specifically, which is that colonial advocacy. I feel really lucky that I had Tavalik Eccles on my cohort on the Prime Minister's Youth Council, because it is so important to discuss with other Inuit or other First Nations or Métis, whatever community you may be a part of, as we hold each other up in these colonial settings, because sometimes they are incredibly intimidating and difficult, and you end up discussing some of the most difficult parts of your culture and of the identity politics you may be walking in right now. And it gives us kind of levity, knowing that we're there together. But despite that, we work beyond our communities, and like I mentioned in my bio, I've spent a lot of time advocating for hunters' rights, and that's something I'm really proud of on the Prime Minister's Youth Council, especially. My atata, my dad, who I know is watching, is a hunter himself, and he'd gotten a moose one summer, and I helped him make some really nice moose jerky and brought it to the Prime Minister for him to try, and to discuss the important nourishment that happens when we support hunters and support the traditional ways of knowing and doing and eating and connecting. And so I feel really grateful that I was able to share that with him, as well as with my fellow cohort members. And one thing I do feel is important to say, although I am here with the Liberal government, I am a fierce NDP supporter. And I was fortunate enough to assist in the territorial elections, volunteering and working with the NDP here in Yukon, as I support their ways of knowing and doing. But sorry, I missed through some of my notes, but when I was working specifically with Tagalik and Haban, Tagalik Eccles right here, and Haban Ali of Toronto, as well as Riley Yesno. And so we discussed a lot of the hardest parts of being a person of color in Canada right now, especially with law and with health and political science, as Tagalik is a lawyer. Haban has done incredible work throughout public health in Canada, as she finished her master's recently. And Riley has done and continues to do so much work in political science and important discussions on Indigenous identity. And she's from Thunder Bay too, which is a wonderful connection that I didn't realize until now. So we're kind of beginning to redisplay colonial history through our eyes as Indigenous people. So kind of a little bit of a turn here, but one hilarious example that I find is Beachy Island on the Northwest Passage. So as Inuit are able to display colonial history more and more through our eyes, where Beachy is described as such a haunting place, and I will admit it is kind of creepy there. It's very foggy. It's just a gravel pit, but being able to display it as it is, a gravel pit where traditionally Inuit didn't live. This was a stopping place when we were going hunting. No one really lived here for more than maybe a night on hunting journeys and stuff. And so it is important as we kind of shift the focus on colonial history through expeditions, such as the Franklin expedition, probably the most famous unsuccessful expedition through the Northwest Passage. And at a grassroots level, it's really important that we're showing our arts and cultures in ways that accurately depicts the land that it's sitting on, such as in Johaven, their community center has many Franklin artifacts, as well as discussing the mistakes that were made and how Inuit did try and help, and how through many different expeditioners and explorers, such as Amundsen, who did listen to Inuit, and he was successful not only in his Northwest Passage journey, but also his Antarctic journey, through learning how to keep warm, through learning how to live sustainably in the North. And so we continue to display our culture in this positive light. I'll use this example as a very recent one. My cousin Lynn held a raffle, and it was very beautiful because her raffle, the way you entered it was just to comment on her Facebook post what you're grateful for. And she was raffling off this stunning purse and mitt set. And I was lucky enough to be chosen as the winner, as I told her that I'm thankful for my little cabin that I live in. Of course, not here right now, I'm at work, but or I'm at UConstruct actually. And it is just so fun to see us sharing in the positivity, especially during hard times such as this pandemic that we're living through right now. And it's important to find those positive moments. And we're finding a lot of peace in our land and connecting with it. And although I've done a lot of work on the ocean, I also fully admit that I am terrified of it and not a strong swimmer. But this is one of the ways that I really experience the beauty of my land, especially being a coastal person, and also challenge my comfort in discomfort as I continue to grow through my skills. And as I try my best to hold other Indigenous folks up as we continue to define our identity and to advocate for our climate. especially living, working, and playing across the Arctic Ocean in particular. That is the one thing I will admit feels bleak right now. And that is in climate advocacy. A lot of my work, so I've been fortunate enough to speak at conferences in Iceland twice, in London, UK, and throughout Canada, and discuss the ways climate is changing in my homes. So for example, people were boating quite late in my hometown this year. And fortunately now the ice is frozen so thick that people are driving to the Arctic Circle in Lakehead National Park in their trucks. They're able to drive on the ice, which is great. But even living here in Yukon, and in my little cabin is where I really feel like I witnessed this. So we had incredible amounts of snow this year and last year, and it caused subsequent flooding across the territory, and it was very hard on those who lived along the river or who lived along the lakes across Yukon. And it caused a lot of devastation and a lot of loss. And not only did we experience that incredible amount of snow again this year, we also just got out of a really cold snap where things were minus 46. It sucks to have an outhouse during those times, but you know, it's what you expect when you live in the north. And then going from minus 46 to just the other day, it was +5. And so much melt happened around my little cabin where all the trees are now not covered in snow. And there was just so much melt. And hopefully that means it eases the flooding that may happen this year, but I'm not an expert in that setting at all. But when I've spoken at various conferences, I specifically remember the last time I went to the Arctic Circle Assembly in Iceland. There was a lot of discussion about the emergency responses to climate change, because we're not working fast enough to keep up with the ways our lands are changing, especially for Indigenous folks whose identity is so intertwined with the land, especially being Inuk, where so many stories live in the land and in the ways people experience the land. You know, I feel very lucky once again that my Iluku, she was very intentional about showing me certain stories about our land and about our culture. And it absolutely breaks my heart thinking that I might not be able to explain the same thing in the same meaningful way that my grandmother did with me. I might not be able to share the same way with my grandkids. And I feel a lot of Indigenous youth are also in the space where we're questioning, well, youth across the world, really, not just Indigenous youth, are questioning if we should have children or not because of how little is being done for our climates. And so there's so many different facets to that. And, you know, back on topic with Iceland, one of the emergency measures that we discussed was having incredible, like huge reflectors to have the heat leave the earth. And of course, these are more long-term thinking of emergency measures, but I know that people are doing our best in holding ourselves accountable to being better to the environment. But I encourage all of you to continue to hold governments to account and to put pressure on governments, because they're the ones who can really crack down on private businesses that are heavily polluting and taking from our lands, such as Nestle taking waters from so many First Nations for nearly no money, and on top of that, really impacting our land. So I really hope that if nothing else sticks with you during this talk, it is the one thing that sticks with you is advocating for our land and putting pressure on those who can bring about meaningful change on a huge corporate scale. But one thing I find is really important, getting back to the grassroots level, which is what I love to focus on, is learning and sharing new skills to keep close to home. So more and more people are learning trades and even thinking about Cambridge Bay and their amazing welders and their amazing artists that are learning how to weld. I'm very happy that Maya Tata and I are really keen on learning metal shop things. And so we made this stunning fire pit together, welding it and using a plasma cutter and just learning a lot of really neat skills, just so that we can make for ourselves and we can support other makers in these communities by being encouraging, by holding each other up. Once again, something that is so important to me and how I live my day to day. And so Maya Tata and I, we're really close, and we love spending time learning and supporting and trying new things, as well as being adventurous, whether it's traveling through Yukon or hiking for 5 days or whatever it may be. And so I feel that it's really important to discuss those grassroots levels, especially with as we are able to journey more and more through more untouched land, such as King Point in Yukon. This was when I was working on the cruise ship once again, and that little pile of wood you see right here on the grasslands, that is what we weren't certain, but we were very, we were leaning towards this, that this was the small little A-frame hut that Roald Amundsen and his crew that made it here were living in when they were waiting on Amundsen to go and let the Norwegian government know that they made it through the Northwest Passage, the fabled Northwest Passage. And very few people have visited this place since then. Mostly hunters have visited this place because we saw a number of whales throughout this area. And even as we were landing, we saw a number of hunters that were just leaving with their catch. And it is amazing to have these truly wild places that haven't been touched in a long time. And even here, where we were able to witness, bears and muskox, and there's this weasel that kept chasing around and looking at all of the strange people that were walking through. And it's incredibly important and beautiful that I have been able to witness it and be so deeply touched by it. And I really hope that others feel the same way about their land and their traditional territories and the places that they love. And one important part of all of these ways of experiencing is by really connecting with those stories from the land and learning the stories of the people that live on your land. I don't live on my traditional territory at the moment. I'm, of course, living here in Whitehorse, and I've been really lucky to be really welcomed into the community, such as working for Training Policy Committee as we divvy funds out to all of 14 Yukon First Nations. And so actually the Yukon Indian People's Training Trust is opening up our funds soon. So if you're a Yukon First Nation who has a project in mind, please keep this in mind and apply. Especially, I want to see more communities do things for their communities, and especially being in the Pandy, we want to be more at home, and we want to find more home in our home, if that makes sense. And as we continue to connect more and more and with our communities, it always comes back, at least for me, to our elders and how they've supported our youth. You can see my Ilugu with some of her best friends. This was a couple of years ago. And she and her friends, just hearing them giggle, hearing them laugh and share stories, and being able to witness them and hear them gossip while they're doing their sewing and all of that stuff. It's beautiful. It is reconciliation as it happens, as we continue to support these people and we continue to help them. One thing that was really interesting and fun to hear about, despite the hardships of the pandemic and all the COVID cases that are currently going through Nunavut and all the lockdowns that are happening, especially at some of the darkest times of the year, as we're only just increasing our daylight. But in these lockdown times, a lot of communities took to their radio airwaves to really connect with each other. And in my hometown in particular, there was a lot of discussion or a lot of elders that were calling into the radio and sharing their stories. And people were sharing hunting stories, people were sharing ghost stories, all to connect and share over the radio waves when we couldn't gather in person. And even thinking about doing this talk virtually, although I would love to visit your community, I'm so thankful that I get to show you a part of my community, despite the distance and despite the difference in cultures. But there are family connections and anti-love and the exhaustion of resiliency. So what I feel is important to discuss. And so while I am a person who loves so deeply and so intentionally, I do admit that there are a lot of difficulties in resiliency. Although I'm thankful that Indigenous folks are so resilient as we've gone through genocides, both literally and cultural genocides. We've had a lot of our cultures taken away from us through colonial institutions, whether this is through museums taking important artifacts that are only just being returned to their traditional territories, or being, like I'd mentioned earlier, being seen as more of an artifact than a person, and losing a lot of our languages across Turtle Island. And I could go on, and on top of that, having climate change and a pandemic to worry about. It is important to remain soft. It's good, you can both be resilient and soft and gentle, because although I consider myself a tough person, someone who's very willing to advocate and be uncomfortable and have these uncomfortable discussions, I also give myself grace to be soft and to be human and be patient with myself, because of the huge amounts of responsibility that Indigenous folks are facing right now, because we are redefining what our identity looks like outside of blood quantum, and what it means to be a participant in our culture, and what it means to reclaim it and to meaningfully be a part of it, and if that makes sense. But it's hard. It's really hard. And despite that, I hope that you give yourself the space and the grace to be patient and to be soft, because there is such exhaustion in this responsibility of advocating, whether you are doing it in policymaking sessions or in roundtables, or through singing and art, or through just everyday discussions with other communities and other people. It's tiring. And no matter how much you may love your culture or love the people that you're talking with, It is a lot to be so deeply, I guess, combing through the strands of your identity and your culture. And so I hope that you take this to be soft and human in these trying times, and connecting with the land and the people you love on that land, such as this is once again my beautiful niece Malaya, being towed behind my sister's Bravo around Fish Lake in Yukon, and giggling and laughing and loving throughout these lands, and playing tag and hiding. And once again, to remain soft is to really intentionally be on your land and be at peace with who you are, and give yourself grace to be weak, because I feel that is the real indicator of strength, is when you just let yourself cry, or you just let yourself be hurt, and let yourself feel your feelings, instead of just considering yourself to be tough and to ignore whatever you may be going through and trekking through. I feel like it's important to let yourself breathe through the grace. And that concludes my presentation. So I hope it's been nice and good and casual, and I hope there's lots of questions to end on. Thank you.
Oh, what a beautiful, beautiful talk. I'm sitting here in my office and I just feel so calm and relaxed. And then, it allowed me to think about, I was thinking of my own daughter, who's I have a 16 and 20-year-old, and, the challenges of life as a young person right now. Thinking of my father, who, had texted me because he's trying to set up a Zoom link with all of his friends and siblings who still speak Anishinaabe, so they can have an hour to just talk in the language once a week and have virtual coffee. So there's just so much, as you talk about that reclamation and resurgence happening all across this land. We had a few comments from people that were here. Some of them had to leave to go to other meetings, but people were just really thrilled to be able to listen to your words and the beautiful photos that you shared. Such a lovely way to, I think, really deeply understand the connection that you have and that many of us have to our land and our territory, and what that looks like when we're visiting other people's territories too, right? And you talked a bit about that in your current space that you're in. So I had invited anyone, if they would like to ask a question. I think we're a small enough group. If you'd like to raise your hand, you can do that, and we can unmute you and you can speak directly to Ashley yourself. So I'd like to, and Kristen King asked if you could give us the name of your friend in Thunder Bay. And I think you said Riley, yes, no?
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
I don't think she's in Thunder Bay right now, but I know that's her home community.
Right. I knew who she was, although I don't know her personally, but she's definitely, part of my territory in Anishinaabe Nation. So do we have any questions or comments for Ashley from our participants joining us today?
One pop up.
Everybody's shy.
Yeah. Thank you, Lynette. I see your chat here. I do present to just high school students. Right now, I'm a speaker with Connected North. So if your high school has a connection with Connected North or taking it global, I do directly take bookings through there. But feel free to email me too, because I love speaking and youth are my heartbeat. So I'm happy to do work. Please book me through Connected North. Pierre.
That's great. We have a question from Rebecca. And I may need Stacy to unmute Rebecca. I'm not sure.
So, hello, I'm not sure if you can hear me. So,
yes, we can.
Merci. Thank you so much for sharing and presenting today. It means so much. I'm also curious like I'm near the end of my undergrad degree and I'm going forward in my master's. And one thing that frustrated me so much was a lack of information on Inuit. And you have such a beautiful culture. I would love to know more. And like the school system, high school and university did an excellent, well, I wouldn't say excellent job. They covered First Nations to some degree because everyone knows the system and how it works. Very little about Inuit. And then I found it was like pretty near nothing about Métis. And so I was wondering for Inuit specific resources, if you have any trustworthy resources offhand that we wouldn't mind sharing with us.
There's a surprising amount of children's books that discuss Inuit culture and Inuit traditions. Like, I don't remember the name of it, but there's one specific book that discusses the traditional adoption that happens in Inuit culture in a really beautiful way that's accessible to children. So there's a lot of resources there. Also looking for Inuit authors is really important. I'll plug my grandfather's book, although he's not Inuit. He worked through so much in the Arctic, and his name is Ernie Lyle, and he wrote An Arctic Man. And so he is my biological grandfather, and he wrote very frankly. Even I think one of his first chapters is called Baloney because he was tired of all the baloney that was written about the North. And so those are really important, as well as going to websites such as Nunavut Siwaniksavut in Ottawa, which is it's a program for Inuit students to learn a wide breadth of topics, such as Nunavut law or our land claims agreement, our traditional cultures. The Inuit Tapiri Kanatami, ITK, they have a lot of great resources on their website as well. Yeah, I agree there's not enough. I think the University of Winnipeg has some good resources as well for more peer-reviewed readings. Yeah, I think that's the only things I can think about off the top of my head, but thanks for your question.
Great, thank you. We have a comment from Lisa Primavesi. Many young Indigenous people are doing advocacy work sort of in isolation online, especially due to COVID. Do you have any suggestions about building community for young people who are doing this work to support each other? And if it has been covered, she was teaching a class and had come in late.
I guess for building community for young people who are doing this work, I feel, at least in my experience, I've been really lucky that I've been able to work with a lot of youth in person pre-COVID, and so that ends up being a lot of support through that, and through maintaining connections through that. And I'm really lucky in that circumstance. But I guess for building community in a lot of these advocacy spheres is, instead of just having talks, it's having panels, because since COVID, I've been fortunate enough to do some panels with Western Arctic Youth Collective, for example, amazing organization that works here in Whitehorse and also across the Western Arctic, especially in the Beaufort Delta region. Excuse me. And so I think having these panels, I've been able to connect with a lot of other advocates and find a lot of community together through that setting. But then even within your community, I feel it's really important to encourage high school students and middle school students, especially, to find ways to participate in the community, whether it's helping them lead, I don't know, maybe weekly youth nights at the school gym, or accessing funding through Taking It Global's Rising Youth programs and using their grants to make community-based initiatives, and to encourage them to really meaningfully participate in their communities.
Okay, thank you so much for that response. I have a question, and I'm not going to say it properly, but you had mentioned the Nunavutski I can't say the other half, the website in Ottawa that had, would you be able to spell that?
Oh, here, I'll write it in the chat.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you so much. If there's any other questions, please feel free to put your hand up.
Yeah, anything. You know, people have asked me about my bowel movements, so I find
You won't do that, I promise.
I appreciate that a lot.
I have a question, and I mean, I probably could Google the answer, but I'm curious. You mentioned that you were on the Prime Minister's Council, and I recall Riley was on the NAN website when Riley was also on that council. But how does a young person apply to be on that council? Because we have quite a few young people here today.
So there's online application. So if you go to the Prime Minister's Youth Council website on the canada.ca, like the government link, I don't remember it off the top of my head, but they have, so the way the application process works is you do kind of an essay section, and there's a number of different questions. Like there were a lot on volunteer experiences that I'd had, and also work experience and things that I'm passionate about. And then from there, they all get reviewed by the Youth Secretariat. And then a select number of folks are selected from that pool to do video interviews. And from those video interviews, they actually do get reviewed by the Prime Minister. And then he selects from those video interviews to join the council.
That's great. And you mentioned a big part of your work on the Youth Council, well, not a big part of it, but one part of it was around hunters' rights. Could you elaborate a bit on that work for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So coming from a family where hunting is a very big part of how we connect with each other and how we feast together and how we love our land through it. And I feel it makes a lot of us much more intentional about caring for our land. And so with hunters' rights specifically, and especially in the North where there's such high rates of food insecurity and a lot of poverty, and even as grocery prices continue to rise with, you know, the strikes that are happening, the supply chain issues, the production issues, staffing issues, there's everything going on right now. And so through these inefficient ways of supporting people, it ends up perpetuating a lot of these issues that we see in rural and northern regions. And so with access to you know, supporting hunters more directly, like I had stated, I'm a particular critic of the Nutrition North program, which subsidizes certain types of food in grocery stores across the North. And although, yes, it's great that we are able to make produce, for example, more affordable, but it's not enough. You know, we need to support hunters in order to really traditionally eat, because even thinking about myself, you know, I've seen dietitians and stuff, and a lot of their suggestions are you have to eat the way your ancestors did, or at least a bit more like them, in order to feel properly nourished. And because that's how evolution has made my body. And so supporting hunters really means you'll be supporting traditional or Indigenous youth, I mean, in getting the nutrition that was really meant for their bodies. And so this might mean subsidizing bullets for hunters who are going out to catch for their community, like whether it's a narwhal, I know it's different kinds of hunting, but like those feed incredible amounts of people. And so whether that's, you know, subsidizing gas or paying for a skidoo repair kind of thing, there's a lot of different ways, especially to advocate for those hunters' rights, as well as the ethical harvesting of fur. Fur is such an important part of me, like even, you know, just my pencil case is seal skin that was made by my grandma. And, you know, I wear fur as often as I can because it's so beautiful. And I'm fortunate enough to live in areas where I know the fur that I'm wearing is ethically harvested. I know that this animal lived as it should in the wild and then was harvested and fed a family, and not only fed a family, but it continues to keep me warm. And as I continue to take care of it, it will keep doing that. And so hunters are really essential, and that's why it's a big part of my advocacy.
That's wonderful. And I know here in Thunder Bay, we've had several schools where they actually take the students out with staff, but also with traditional hunters in the region, and they're learning tracking and how to care for everything. They harvest a moose, then they, have all the ceremonial pieces that go with that, and then they tan the hide and they use the bones. And so there's really, I think, some interesting movement across the country on how to, what normally people would have learned with their family. They're now learning in a different way because they're not with their family, but they're having the opportunity to still learn it with those knowledge holders in the region. So that's really great to see and hear. Absolutely. We've had a few thank yous here. Fiona, thank Miigwech Ashley for sharing your journey. Truly inspirational to hear about your thoughts on climate change, activism, and the importance of traditional ways of life. She has to go teach a class now, but it was great listening. From Gail, Miigwech for your presentation. Nice to see youth being gentle activists for our lands and arts and culture, supporting hunters as we need our traditional foods more and more. I think, and I know you mentioned the food graphic was a bit older, but shockingly expensive, even with the subsidies.
Absolutely, yeah, and it continues to go up.
I paid $5 for some lettuce the other day, and I was thinking that was a lot of money. But it's just not the way. And I'm wondering, and this might be maybe a bigger food issue, but when we talk about, the social determinants of health and how food is really a critical piece into that. And you mentioned, eating how our ancestors ate, because that's through evolution, the way that our bodies developed. That will look different all across the world, depending on where your ancestors are from and how they traditionally lived. So I think those are really important things to remember as we work against disease and diabetes and heart issues and those other things, outside of a pandemic. Just our general health and diet plays an important role in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we are at that time where it is kind of the end of the lunch hour for us here in Ontario. It's just about 1 o'clock our time. And so I'm going to I have a presentation, but I'm going to invite Elder Nawagizik to give our closing for this event. So Miigwech, thank you so much.
Hello. Thank you for your presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
That was excellent. You covered a lot of ground, and as you were talking, and just refreshing my memory and about culture and land and we're struggling, to get land recognized as part of our treaty agreements. So, food in that lands is getting scarce in our area, polluted, sometimes even the moose is not safe to eat in different areas, So to me, guys, for your presentations, I hope you find ways to save that good food up north, so maybe we might be able to use it one day. Keep whacking those seals in the head there. I heard you that how to, you know, the try to discourage you from your traditional ways. They try to use shame, you know. Shaming is a big part, you know. So to me, that's for that. You're resilient, you're a strong woman, and I think you're gonna go a long ways. Oh, thank you. Oh, me let's show us. Yeah. You know what kid and mahjong na to mishtam. Oh, netnap mo siyan. Okay, ngayon ito. Guli chitwang madzoin tam nasek. And Chmilich. Have a good day, folks. Thank you. Safe journey.
Miigwech, Elder Jean. And Ashley, I would like to again extend our deep thanks, Quanamic. Thank you so much for joining us today. I have just a couple of screen shares. I want to just do a little share. Unfortunately, today our president was unable to join, but she does a presentation. So we have a certificate from our president just recognizing your talk today as part of our invited lecture for our Global Indigenous Speaker Series. So we will be sending that to you in the mail. And in the, you know, as you mentioned, adorning ourselves, we have a pair of porcupine quill and beaded earrings made by one of our staff, actually, in our Indigenous Initiatives Department, Sheila Pelche-Demera, who is awaiting her first grandchild today as well. So I just wanted to let you know that that will be coming to you by mail as well. So when you get to wear those, you can think of us here in Anishinaabe territory.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very grateful that I can share all of my thoughts and love for my home and for all of Turtle Island's homes. So Kuyanamik for inviting me.
Quanamic. And thank you to everybody for joining us today.
Kuyanamik.